I do think that there is also a link between the climate crisis and some of the security problems in the world. Perhaps this applies more to my country than to yours, since you are so resource rich. But many countries are now so dependent on the global oil market that they have been taking large risks connected to the fact that the largest reserves of oil are in the most vulnerable region of the world, in the Persian Gulf. We've had 2 wars going on in the Persian Gulf region, and there were many motivations. I personally thought the invasion of Iraq was a mistake, but whatever you think about the reasons for that decision by my country's government, surely you can agree one of the reasons was that the global economy is now vulnerable to the possibility of a disruption of the flow of oil from the Persian Gulf. So as we shift more to low-carbon sources of energy, to renewable sources of energy that are available in every country, the world becomes a safer and more secure place. And as we move more aggressively toward renewable energy and sustainable forestry and sustainable agriculture and higher levels of efficiency, we create new sources of employment at a time when the global economy greatly needs a new focus on ways to put many more people to work. So this common thread runs through the climate crisis, the economic crisis the world is still attempting to solve, and the security crisis that has caused many challenges. And that common thread is our overdependence on polluting and unsustainable carbon-based energy. Now, let me talk about the climate crisis itself for a moment. Many people, including someone at lunch who asked me a question about this earlier today, have difficulty really believing that this crisis is as large as it is. And naturally, as human beings, we tend to assume that if something has never happened in the past, it is not likely to happen in the future. We have a tendency to confuse the unprecedented with the improbable. And often that's a good rule of thumb. But the exceptions are very dangerous. And this is an exception for 3 reasons. We have seen a radical change in the basic relationship between human civilization on the one hand and the ecological system of the planet on the other. How could that be? Well, I said there are 3 reasons. Number 1, in 100 years, in the last 100 years, we have seen a quadrupling of world population. In fact, if you go farther back, the scientists tell us that it took 10,000 generations of human beings before we reached a population of 2 billion people, which is roughly what it was when my generation was born at the end of World War II. But now, just in the 62 years that I have lived, we have gone from 2 billion to 6.8 billion. Not 10,000 generations, one lifetime that hopefully is not even over yet. And they tell us that while my generation is still alive, the population of the earth will reach 9 billion people. And the good news is that population growth is slowing down, and the population is expected to stabilize at about 9 billion people. Now, 6.8 billion, 9 billion, that's a big difference from 2 billion. So we have a larger impact on the earth. It is a success story when we look at how population growth is slowing, and the social scientists now understand very clearly what brings about this change. And there are 4 factors. Number 1, the education of girls, which many believe is the most important factor. Number two, the empowerment of women to take part in the decision-making of their communities and families and nations. Number three, the availability of fertility management in forms that are acceptable culture by culture, country by country, so that women can choose how many children to have and the spacing of those children. And fourth, which probably is the most important factor, higher child survival rates. Lower child death rates, higher child survival rates. That may sound counterintuitive, but the reason it's so crucial is that when parents have confidence that their children will grow into adulthood, then they are more willing and desirous of having fewer children. So in North America, in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, the family size has already come down dramatically. And there are two patterns, high birth rates and high death rates, and then another pattern, low birth rates and low death rates. The death rates come down first, and then the birth rates come down a generation or a half a generation later. And the good news is that in the developing countries of the world, that pattern is also taking hold. Almost every nation on earth is partway down that transition toward lower birth rates, lower death rates, and smaller families. But the fact that we have already quadrupled population in less than a century means that we already now have a bigger impact, and that impact is going to continue to grow before we reach a stable population of 9 billion. That's the first factor that has transformed our relationship to the environment. The second factor is more important by far, and that is that the power of the technologies that we use has grown 1 million times over. The technologies in common use today have far more power than anything that our grandparents could have dreamed of. And of course, the ones that get the most attention are the ones that transform carbon-based energy sources into energy. 85% of the energy used in the world today comes from coal and oil and gas. And the wasteful uses of this energy also is due to the fact that the technologies we use, while powerful, were built and designed in an era when energy was very cheap and waste was often ignored. But if you think about the power of genetic engineering and the new molecular science and nanoparticles and supercomputers, and the list is a very long one, our ability to transform nature into our own design is much greater now than it has ever been in the past. So many more people multiplied by much more powerful technology means that we are having a bigger impact. And the most vulnerable part of the Earth's ecological system is the atmosphere. When you stand outside and look up at the sky, it seems like a vast and limitless expanse. But the pictures brought back from outer space by the astronauts confirms what the scientists have long told us, and that is that the sky is a very thin shell surrounding the planet. It is less than 1/1000th the thickness of the planet itself. Some have compared it to if you have a large globe with a coat of varnish, the thinness of that varnish relative to the globe is similar to the thinness of the atmosphere. It's a small volume of space. If you could drive in an automobile at normal speeds straight up, you would reach the top of the sky in just a few minutes. And so since it is a very small space, when we put 90 million tons of global warming pollution into that space every day, it mounts up